There's always a clear, correct answer when dealing with questions that are objective in nature, such as general knowledge or current affairs. After all, they're facts. But when dealing with questions such as the essay writing, which is an integral part of the UPSC CSE Mains exam, there is no right or wrong answer. It's all about subjectivity. But there is a right way of doing it, and that is exactly what we are going to be covering in our brand new initiative, Essay Prep with CTwT. In this initiative, we will be reviewing answers set by you. What works, what doesn't work, what should be the right format, what should be the right structure, and much more. All this with the help of officers and toppers who have already cleared this examination. So, what are you waiting for? Let's get writing with CTwT.
Hello everyone, this is Abhishek Saraf. I've secured All India Rank 8 in UPSC Civil Service exam of 2019. And in this video for an academy, I'll be discussing how to write a good essay in brief. And then I'll be reviewing essays written by the students of an academy. So let's begin. First of all, when you do write an essay in the UPSC exam, first of all, you select the topics from the two subsections that have been given. So depending on your comfort, you do select the topic, and then becomes the brainstorming session, which is generally about 20 to 25 minutes. After that, in the brainstorming, you decide the structure of your essay, what will be the basic flow from introduction, body, and conclusion, what will be the aspects like social, economic, political, cultural, what kind of aspects you will cover in your essay, and then not only the aspects, but then the 5 Ws and 1 H. So you design the questions that you're going to be answering in the essay. And then comes the aspect that you will cover from historical aspect to present and then to the futuristic conclusion. So this is basically the flow of the essay. And then in the essay, it is advisable that you show a compassionate face, a humanitarian aspect in the essay at a couple of points. It is also advisable that you give examples and case studies to substantiate your argument. It is generally said that the essay should be about 1,000 words or at max 1,200 words, as the UPSC has set the limit. But it is also advisable that per page, you have 3 paragraphs, about 100 words in every page, 90 to 100 words in every page. And then the structure of each paragraph is supposed to be that the first line is the assertion that you make. And then the second line is the rationale for that assertion. So you logically explain it. And then the third point or the third line in a paragraph will be the substantiation through the example. So you made an argument, you explained it, and then you substantiated it. That is how a paragraph has to be designed. And then you move from social to economic to political to cultural to historical to geographical to ethical to international to environmental aspects, depending on which aspect is suitable for which topic. And then based on this analysis of what the situation is, personally, my strategy was to also analyze that why a particular situation is there. If there is a problem, why does it exist, and how do I solve it? So why the problem exists forms the pre-conclusion, and how do I solve it forms the conclusion. What is being done about it? What can be an innovative idea to solve the problem? So that is how my flow or my structure of the essay used to be. Now, a personal note on this topic is that I have written 3 mains, cleared all of them, secured a rank in the final list 3 times. But what kept me from being an IAS in 2017 and 2018 attempt was precisely the essay paper. So what we say is that you learn from your mistakes, and that is what I have done. So over 3 years, 3 attempts, I have condensed my experiences, and I basically made a checklist of things that are supposed to be done in the essay. So first was identify the body and identify the base, the foundation, as well as the argument in the topic of the essay. For example, if the topic is like it was in 2017, the destination of the nation depends on what happens in the classrooms of the nation. So classrooms of the nation is the base, is the foundation, and the argument is the destiny of the nation. So destiny of the nation is what we'll be discussing through what happens in the classroom. So that is one thing. Then I used to divide my pages, 10 or 11 pages, whatever is available. I would divide my pages accordingly. That 1.5 page has to be for introduction, 2 to 2.5 pages have to be for conclusion, 1 page for each aspect, like social, economic, political, cultural, then 1 page for the discussion of why. So that helps you to ensure that you are writing what you're supposed to write, where you're supposed to write, and at the end, when you've written your essay, You present a balanced document rather than a lopsided document in which you have spent 3 pages on social aspect and you barely had half a page to write the conclusion. It is not advisable in the essay. One rule of thumb that I would like to emphasize is that don't try to be exhaustive in the essay. There might be 100 aspects in the 100 points that you could write in the social aspect itself. But your point is not to be give an exhaustive list of things. Your idea is to show in the essay that you have understood the topic, you have the capacity to think and analyze, and you have the capacity to give solutions. Don't try to exhibit your knowledge in the essay beyond the substantiation and the argument aspect. What I mean is that once you have made the argument, once you have explained the argument, once you have substantiated it, don't try to exhibit unnecessary knowledge. Don't try to show that you know a lot of data, that you know a lot of schemes. That is not needed. That gets judged in the GS papers themselves. Okay. So essay paper is not to judge your knowledge. It is to judge your personality. It is to judge your capability of thinking. It is to judge your problem solving orientation. Okay, so basically you can think of it as a policy writing exercise. Policy writing does not have to be done on exhaustive knowledge. It has to be done on sufficient knowledge, but not exhaustive compilation of knowledge has to be done in the policy. Why I'm telling you this is because precisely these kind of mistakes, what I made in 2017 and 2018. And in 2017, I ended up with 105 marks out of 250. And 2018, I got 79 marks. So these are the mistakes that I made, and these are the learnings that I drew from it, that essay paper has to be balanced, has to cover various aspects, has to be substantiated by examples, has to show a compassionate aspect, and then you have to do brainstorming. You have to structure your essay accordingly. Social, political, economic, cultural, in my opinion, is not sufficient. It is necessary, but not sufficient. After that, you have to develop a thesis statement of what is there, why is it there, how do we solve it? And then how do we solve it part I've seen, like in the essays that I will be reviewing now, and in other essays that I have written and some other aspirants have written, how do we solve it part is something that most aspirants address by being very idealistic or using terms from GS4. Full jargon from GS4 and constitutional preamble is used. But please realize that that is fine to a certain extent, but you have to show the practical aspect of the things as well. You have to give a solution that is practically implementable rather than just an idealistic compilation. Okay, so idealistic compilation can be step one, but then what the government can do, what the government is doing, what NGOs and civil society organizations can do, what you as an individual can do, and then what kind of future can we look to. This should be the structure of the conclusion. In the introduction, my strategy was to see what the purpose of the introduction is. So my point of view is that the purpose of the introduction is that you should be able to convey first to the examiner that you have understood the topic. Okay, so basically the examiners should know that, okay, this person got the topic and it is going to explain it further in the essay. Second paragraph of the introduction should be used to give an interpretation of the terms that you're going to interpret widely. You have to define the terms, define the keywords in the essay. Okay, so that when you take a wider interpretation, wider than literal interpretation of a term. For example, if you are writing an essay on poverty and you interpret poverty as cultural poverty and intellectual poverty as well. So cultural poverty means you're losing your cultural values. Intellectual poverty means valueless living. So if you're going to interpret a term widely, then it's literal interpretation. Then it is advisable to define that term in the introduction itself. I say so because when you do interpret the term widely in the body of the essay, unless and until the examiner is anticipating it, it will create a jerk in their reading. It will create a shock in their mind. By that, I mean, there will be a lapse until they adjust to it. And that disrupts the flow. And when the flow gets disrupted, impact gets reduced. And impact is what will give you marks. So by defining the terms, you tell the examiner to anticipate what is going to come ahead in the essay. At the same time, in the introduction, you can also give a brief overview of the structure of the essay. That first we'll cover the various aspects, then we'll cover why the police problem exists, and then we'll see how the problem can be solved. So this basic flow of the essay is already told to the examiner, so the examiner gets a hint of what to anticipate in the essay. And then you write the introduction, body, conclusion, moving from historical to present to future. A good way to conclude the essay is to link it with the introduction. And some aspirants do it, like if they have written a story in the introduction, they tend to link the end of the essay with the story and concluding it with a different kind of ending. If it is a tragic story in which they're trying to draw a learning, So a solution that they wrote in the conclusion can give a happy ending to the story and a happy ending to the essay as well, or a positive ending to the essay as well. A positive ending to the essay is non-negotiable. It shows that you're an optimistic person at the end of the day. Also, some topics inherently are negative. Like there have been topics in UPSC like if development is not engendered, it is endangered. Even though it was a controversial topic in the sense that word engendered was interpreted as making gender neutral or making gender sensitive. But this is not the literal interpretation. However, the point being that if this topic is in itself is negative, so most of the body of the essay will be negative and you don't need to worry about that. You don't need to be concerned about that. Okay, it will be negative because there are a lot of negative aspects to it. The topic in itself is negative. But at the end, you will give solutions which can solve the existing problem that you have discussed in the essay, and then your conclusion will be futuristic and optimistic. So with this, I would like to move to the copies that I've checked, and some of the aspirants have sent copies to Unacademy, and I'll be basically calling them out. So the first copy that I'm going to be reviewing is on the topic that ships don't sink because of water around them. Ships sink because of the water that gets into them. So the first thing that I would like to point out outright is that there are two aspects to this topic. Don't sink because of the water around them. Okay, so water is around, it helps the ships to float. So, and then the second aspect is they sink when water gets into them. So my first approach would have been to show that if there are challenges, if there are negativity, that is how I would have begun my brainstorming. If there are challenges, if there are negativity, they can enable you. They can enable you to become a better version of yourself. Like you grow from your challenges, you learn from your challenges, and you become more robust. And then if the negativity comes within you, then you are in trouble. So both of these aspects have to be addressed in the essay. Okay. And then I'll just move to the macro comments. I read and reviewed the essay, written my comments, and I'll move to the macro comments. And in this introduction itself, I would have picked up a story which would have explained both these aspects of it. For example, my story or my case study in the introduction would have been India and Pakistan and the dichotomy that exists between those two countries. These two countries became independent at almost the same time, a gap of 1 day, immaterial. But then look at India now and look at Pakistan now. India's economy is one of the largest in the world, and India's constitution is there. India has a stable polity, none of which is available in Pakistan. So what is the difference? The negativity with which Pakistan was born got into the polity, got into the administration, and look where it led to Pakistan. And the positivity with which India was born and the constitution and the robust values that we incorporated in the constitution led us somewhere else. So this is a dichotomy that I would have explained with one example in the introduction. Then I would have explained that basically what can be meant by a ship. Ship can be an individual, ship can be an organization, ship can be a family, it can be a country, it can be the world. And I use that interpretation of country. Water, what is water? Now water can be a challenge, water can be a precarious situation, water can be a negative value, water can be anything that causes a problem, water can be any negativity. Now with this interpretation, I can use n number of things, n number of challenges that exist in our society, polity, economy, culture, whatever. Like casteism is a negative thing that exists in our society, so it is the water. Or corruption in politics is an example or interpretation of water. So now the macro, coming to the macro comments, and then I would have gone to the social, economic, political, cultural aspects. Then I would have explained that why does it happen that when the water is outside it enables, and when it gets inside the ship sinks. So with all these examples, I would have explained the problem, that it happens, why it happens, and how can we improve upon it? How can we use it to our advantage? Because at the end of the day, shipbuilders did not decide to remain on the harbor. They decided to venture anyway, and they built a ship so that water cannot get in, and then we can float on it. That is just a metaphor. The point is you have to face the challenges, you have to get the better of them, you have to evolve. And that is what my approach would have been. So how do we evolve? So overall, I like the essay. It was a good attempt. And basically what I can remember is that you have picked most of the dimensions. You have picked up many examples. You have picked most of the dimensions that I just mentioned, like social, political, economic, international aspects. And then you have given solutions to, as in, there are two different aspects. You have mentioned that there's casteism in Indian society, so that is the problem. And then COVID-19 is also a problem, and the lagging growth of Indian economy is also a problem. So in this way, you have shown that the ship can be sunk or it is sinking, or these are the challenges. And then you gave the solutions to them as well. These are two separate parts of the body, and the solution was also given. And then when I mentioned that the conclusion should also have a solution in it. So like I mentioned, you broadly touched upon the various facets of the solution, like there should be a value-based solution, and then there should be a reform, legal reform, there should be there. So you broadly touched on the solutions as well, and they can be found in bits and pieces in your body of the essay. You have used the word ship repeatedly in the essay. Why say so? Because once you use the keywords from the essay in the body of the from the topic of the essay in the body of the essay, it helps the examiner to connect what you're saying with the topic, and it enables you to avoid any diversion. Otherwise it is very easy to go off track and off topic in the essay, and it requires a lot of opportunity cost in terms of number of words to come back to topics. So that is one good aspect that I could see in your essay. And then you presented a very good discussion about the values, like you mentioned the Nolan Committee, you mentioned Gandhiji's values. So I could see that the solution that I'm showing on the screen, that politics without principle, religion without tolerance, these are 7 sins by Gandhiji. So that is quite good. And use of quotes. You did use quotes throughout the body of the essay. Use of quotes is appropriate. However, I would advise that one quote at the end of the essay is sufficient. Otherwise, it creates a discontinuity in the mind of the examiner, because you have to jump from quote to text. And then for you also, as an aspirant writing the essay, linking what you're writing with the quote requires some text. Otherwise, quote just hangs in the middle of the text. It does not create much sense. You have taken a good example in the introduction of the LPG reforms and the political instability that happened. Still, India was able to emerge from those from the LPG crisis, from the economic crisis that happened in the early years of the last decade of the previous century. So India was able to emerge, and India paid off its debts before time. However, I would advise you to think a little bit more, because this example is a little bit debatable. Why I say so? Because some people have suggested that the political instability that happened throughout the decade of the 1990s was a consequence of the economic crisis that India went through. So some people might say that the water of economic crisis and the instability that it caused could get inside the body of the Indian polity and cause instability. So that is debatable. So what I'm saying is that when you pick an example, try to explain and try to brainstorm it better. Then, like I mentioned, there are 2 aspects to the essay: that ships don't sink from the water outside, but it actually keeps the ship afloat. So how did someone overcome the challenges and they faced, and they emerge stronger? Okay, that is what I would have expected in this body of the essay. I could have given the example of the late Abraham Lincoln. He became the president of the US, but he faced a lot of troubles before that. He is one of the best known orators in the history of the world, but he was not born that way. He faced a lot of challenges and he practiced a lot. So that is the example that I would have given, that there was negativity around him. He could not achieve much success in his initial attempts in politics. But then he did not let that negativity get in him. He faced those challenges head on, improved, and then created history. So that some sort of discussion on these lines was expected. I expected when I read this topic, and that could have been included. And then once again, you wrote this example from history that India, Bharat Mata, was surrounded by water from 3 sides, although that was not really relevant. But then it has been able to ensure its survival. The civilization of India has been able to ensure its survival while many civilizations got extinct. However, the example that you gave was quite debatable, because it is precisely the conflicts within, the negativity within, the water within, that led us to fall victim to the colonial rule. And these internal conflicts were exploited by the Britishers. So I found your example a little bit off track in that sense. Once again, like I said, try to use the examples which are bulletproof, or like try to brainstorm on your examples. Personally, like I mentioned in the opening of the review, like I would have used this example of India in a little bit different manner. Like, India is surrounded by adversaries, like it is Pakistan and China have shown themselves to be known adversaries. Then there is instability all around the Indian subcontinent, like in Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Nepal, Bangladesh. But India did not let this negativity get into it. Even in 1971, when India was directly affected by the crisis in East Pakistan, India was impacted by the influx of refugees, but it did not let this negativity get into the polity or the military. It prepared and it emerged victorious. So that is the example I would have chosen from history rather than the survival of Indian civilization. And coming to the next comment, you decided to focus on India, the ship of India. It is a general advice that until and unless the topic mentions India, please don't by default decide to focus on India. This topic was so wide that it could have encompassed the entire humanity and the entire earth, and even beyond that. But then somehow you decided to focus on India, and that restricted your domain. Then I found that there were too many metaphors of ship without linking to real reasons. Like you mentioned that the ship of India, the ship of this, the ship of that. But I would have expected in the topic or in the body of the essay that, okay, you are using the metaphor of ship, you are using the imagery of ship, so XYZ thing is ship, that is okay. But then if it is failing, then why is it failing? Why is it sinking? And you have to link it with the water that is around it. For example, if Indian society is your ship, then the social evils that are there is the water around it. Ship drowned, that like the Indian society, if it is drowning, or Indian polity, if it is drowning, like you mentioned in the body of the essay, then I would have mentioned that the water is social prejudices like casteism, patriarchy that exist in India. Similarly, for polity, I would have mentioned that politics, some people have said that it has turned into a quest of power, fame, and money rather than public service. And this is the negativity that have gotten into the ship of Indian politics. That is why it is sinking. That is how I would have linked it. Similarly, at the same time, I would have produced a counter example of how would it have been used productively. For example, I could have mentioned the Vedic age in which Indian society was free from these prejudices of casteism, patriarchy, etc. So that Vedic age has been mentioned as an egalitarian society. So if the water of negativity does not get in, then it is much better. So eliminating prejudices from within, leading to a more egalitarian society. That is what I mentioned, Vedic society. And even now we can take the examples at the countries which have been able to eliminate this negativity, like the Scandinavian countries are doing much better in gender parity index because they have less prejudices. So the water of negativity is not inside, so they are doing much better. And a better way to address this entire thing could have been adding one more line, like casteism is there. So how does this water of negativity affect the ship of Indian society? Why? Because it reduces the social capital, it causes violence, it causes people to live below their potential, it hinders equality of opportunity. So this is what your argument could have been here. Like there is a water of negativity, it gets into the society, it affects it that way, and that is how it causes the sinking of the ship of Indian society, or possible sinking of the ship of Indian society. Similarly, about polity, you could have given an example of New Zealand, like good governance, they are well known for it. Similarly, the Scandinavian countries, why? Because they avoided the water of negativity, for example, of this power, fame, and money. And then people started, the leaders who were elected for their merit, they started working for the people. There was citizen-centric governance. The policies that were framed were actually intended and calibrated for the welfare of the people. And this is what happened. Otherwise, when it is just to aggrandize someone or collect power or fame or money, then something else happens. So this kind of assertion, argument, and substantiation would have made your point much better, rather than just mentioning the problem of the Indian ship, that Indian ship in polity is facing certain problem, Indian ship in economy is facing certain problem, Indian ship in society is facing certain problem. You did mention the solutions later down the body of the essay. However, it creates a repetition, and that is what I would advise you to avoid. Similarly, when you are mentioning the ship, the water has to be mentioned side by side, and how the water, if it does not get help, if it does not get in help, and if it remains outside, if it does not get inside, it helps, and if it gets inside, it can cause problems. That is what should have been seen throughout the body of your essay rather than the discussion of the ship. Similarly, I would have expected many more aspects like the environmental, cultural aspects, and some more discussion on the fall of values. Like it could have been a very important thing to explain various kinds of crimes that are happening in society, be it crimes against women, crimes against children, crimes against senior citizens, or be it the environmental aspect, like society is becoming much more materialistic. So this could also have helped, and you could have linked it with the society of Vedic era, which was not that materialistic. Or you could have linked it with minimalism, like the want for material, the want for things is outside a minimalistic life. So it creates a much lesser impact on society. Similarly, a much better construction of historical aspect I've already discussed that could have been presented. Then I've always mentioned that even though some people emphasize, but then personally my orientation is that social, political, economic, cultural, international, environmental, historical, geographical, ethical, all these things are fine and good, but they are necessary but not a sufficient condition or sufficient discussion to create a good essay. You should focus on what, which is social, political, economic, culture, etc. Then you should focus on why. That if there is a problem, how do I address it? And then why part, that why is there a problem, forms the pre-conclusion and how comes in the conclusion. So rather than writing a précis of the essay in the conclusion, I would advise you to like write a pre-conclusion in terms of why and how it comes in the conclusion. Then I could see that you skip to the solution of values in the essay. Then like you were mentioning the problems, then you should skip to the solution and then you went back to the discussion of the problem again. This should be avoided. It creates a lot of discontinuity and it hampers the structure of the essay. Then you mentioned this topic of climate change out of nowhere in the conclusion. See, conclusion is something which should close off the essay. Opening a new topic in conclusion is completely avoidable and you should not do it. That is why you are supposed to brainstorm about the essay prior, before you even begin the essay, so that you are able to structure your points well. So opening a new topic in conclusion is something that we should avoid, even if it is just two words like climate change, because it leads the examiner to think about environmental aspect completely. And that is what can prompt an examiner that this person has not mentioned the environmental aspect earlier in the essay. Like I mentioned, you have to try to structure your essay better, avoid skipping aspect from one aspect to another and then back. Like you have mentioned about the social aspect at 2-3 places in the essay. So try to avoid that. And like I mentioned, if you keep on skipping back and forth between aspects, then it disrupts the flow of the essay. A disrupted flow leads to lesser impact and lesser impact leads to lesser marks. You can see that you could have used much more case studies like I mentioned in your own essay. Once again, a similar thing, when you use metaphor, to you it might be evident that how the metaphor is linked to the topic of the essay, but to the examiner it might strike after a little bit, after a couple of seconds of thought. You might think that it is okay, but then for the examiner it creates a disruption in reading of the essay. It reduces the readability of the essay, reduces the flow, and then reduces the mark. So one line linking the metaphor, the keywords of the metaphor to the keywords of the body of your essay, to the keywords of the thesis is always advisable. Then, like I mentioned, that in most solutions that I found, much jargon of GS4 has been used. And that is the easiest thing to do. Like you can mention transparency, accountability, integrity, honesty, truth, wisdom, justice, temperance, all these things can be mentioned. And they found very easy solutions that should be incorporated in the essay, but they are not sufficient. Since it is supposed to be essay written by a bureaucrat, practical solutions are something that are non-negotiable. And it is not as if you didn't touch upon them. You did touch upon them, like proper implementation of laws. That is something of a very practical aspect. Similarly, bold reforms you mentioned, they are very practical aspect, but the problem is that you left them at this point, like implementation of laws and bold reforms. How do I do that? What kind of reforms are needed? That is the practical discussion that you could have built. Similarly, you mentioned about the ARC2 report, second ARC report on ethics in governance. Even that report, even though it mentioned about building better ethical values in governance, it also mentioned about practical solutions that can be taken and should be taken. So should you. I was just trying to substantiate my point. Like I mentioned, try to stick with one quote per essay, otherwise it creates too many jerks in the essay. I should have written original. I'm sorry about that. Try to give original ideas in the essay rather than someone else's ideas in solution. What I mean is that one quote to summarize your essay, to substantiate your entire thesis, to substantiate your stand at the end of the essay in conclusion is acceptable. But entire body of your solution cannot be mostly ideas given by someone else. Like it was Gandhiji's ideas of 7 sins. Then ARC, second ARC, ethics in governance report that was quoted by you. So solution should be something that you come up with. And then like I'm just giving some examples. It is not an exhaustive list, but then if you want to mention some solutions could have been the imaginative use of technology so that governance becomes acceptable. It creates a level playing field. It creates transparency. So the negativity of corruption is kept aside, or the negative waters of corruption are kept from entering the body of the governance. Then legal reforms, like you mentioned, to address inequality, or this idea of bottom-up approach, it can be implemented in n number of solutions. Right-based approach, this can be implemented in n number of solutions. Like if we are able to frame our policies in such a way that they focus on the rights of the people, okay, rather than doles by the government. If you focus on the rights of the people and enabling people to claim those rights as well as live up to their fullest potential, if you do things like that, then the negativity of inequity in development, inequity in society can be better addressed. Similarly, decentralization can help you avoid the concentration of power. Decentralization is a very practical thing that can be done and should be done, and it's being done. So if you avoid the concentration of power, then the abuse of power for self-interest, the intention that some people get into politics for, the intention that some people get into politics with is like aggrandizing power and amassing wealth and living with fame. That is something that can be avoided if decentralization is done well. So things like that, practical solutions like that, make your essay much more impactful rather than giving it the feel of a novel. Okay, so these are my macro comments in the body of the essay about the essay. I'll briefly go over the micro comments as well, and the macro comments basically summarize the micro comments, like I mentioned about, like you mentioned a good example with the BOP crisis. But like I mentioned, a better solution would have been comparing the two situations, the two countries of India and Pakistan. And then here I would have gone with the approach that I want to compare how, if negativity is kept aside, if negativity is not allowed to enter you, you do well. And if it enters you, you do not do well. So India, Pakistan would have been a good dichotomy here. And then here I would advise you to not try to turn phrases too much in the essay, like get into the depth of water. Now, instead of doing this, which is a literary tool, trying to turn phrases, I would advise you to use the use the words, limited number of words that you do have in a judicious manner to explain what do you mean by the water in itself. Okay, this is what I've written here. I have already mentioned that you need not focus on India. Then this is the internal conflicts thing, like Bharat Mata and from history that if we have emerged and we have survived. I would have personally avoided this example because colonial rule is a counter point to this. Throughout the body of the essay, I would have expected that you would have linked the ship with the problem and then the water that got in, and then how it has caused the ship to sink, or it has caused the ship to be sinking. And then politicians of our country have let us the country down. Please avoid generalizations like this. It is not only as if only the politicians have let the country down. Several bureaucrats and even the citizens in different capacities have let the country down. So that is first thing. And not all politicians are corrupt. So please try to avoid generalizations like this. Here, I've mentioned that you need to substantiate what your point is a little bit more. Listing issues is not enough. Link with the cause. That is what I've mentioned here. Discuss the water too, not just the ship. Like I mentioned, you have just mentioned that Indian ship is, this is happening to Indian ship, that is happening to Indian ship. Discuss why is it happening as well. Similarly, second ARC report, I personally don't think that it is the best of the examples that you could have given. Several other examples could have been used to substantiate the fall of values in our society. Similar point, focus on the water, drowning if inside, not drowning if the water is outside, drowning if it is inside. Both things have to be focused upon. The World Health Organization is today like questioning its own existence. Try to avoid slang language like that. It is better if you use formal language. Explain what do you mean by waters. Similarly, like I've mentioned, that it is very advisable that in the starting of the essay that you mention what is meant by water, what is meant by ship. The recent cyclone Tokate in the Arabian Sea submerged the ship, whatever the name is, and 150 people. This is a literal example. It is not relevant here. See, the topic is much expansive, and I don't find this example relevant here at all. Then, like I mentioned, you're given a good solution, but then after giving the solution, you started discussing the problem. And then you came back to the solution. Similarly, it is too big a paragraph. I've advised that 3 paragraphs per page is better. All GS4 terms in the essay, all GS4 terms in the solution. So try to include practical aspects as well, not just the GS4 terms. You could have built very well on this point. This is a very good point of international cooperations for intellectual property values, but cooperation is something that you could have built upon to avoid the negativity, but you just ended in one paragraph. Like I mentioned, try to avoid bringing up new dimensions. Then try to give theoretical as well as practical aspects as well. This, if we keep out of the without, we have got the best shape. I personally could not really associate or attach with this out of the without. I didn't really understand what is being written here and try to use simpler language. And the ending could have been much more optimistic. Like, why do you want to say do not do this? You could have mentioned that you do this as well. Avoid this, avoid that. Don't do this. Do something like that. This could have been done, and this could have been a much more optimistic conclusion. Similarly, the conclusion should not just be didactic or instructive. It could have been much more case study based. That would have helped the examiner to associate with the conclusion all the much more. So overall, I would say that it is a good attempt, and you have covered most of the aspects of the essay. But some things that I found lacking or some scope of improvement that I saw, I have mentioned. So thank you very much, and hopefully we'll see you in the list soon enough.